The first bell had barely finished echoing through the crowded hallways of Redland High when the day's most unfortunate confrontation began brewing. Quietly, almost invisibly, the way storms sometimes gather overhead long before anyone notices the clouds. Students surged from every direction, their footsteps and chatter creating the usual morning roar, lockers slamming, friends calling out to one another, teachers ushering dawdlers along, but beneath the surface hum of routine lurked a current of tension centered on a single figure who moved with the unsettled energy of someone already looking for trouble. His name was Derek Malloy, a boy whose reputation for throwing his weight around had spread through the school faster than cafeteria gossip, and as he stalked through the hallway that morning, flicking irritated glances at anyone who dared make eye contact, it was obvious that he had woken up in one of his particularly volatile moods. People parted instinctively at his approach, not because they feared catastrophic violence. Derek wasn't that kind of menace, but because they knew he enjoyed intimidation the way some kids enjoyed video games. It was a pastime, a skill, a source of daily entertainment. And, as fate would have it, the very person he collided with that morning was the one person in the entire building he should absolutely not have chosen to antagonize, though he had no way of knowing it. She was new to Redland High, a quiet transfer student who had arrived only 3 weeks earlier, known to most simply as Mira Lane, the girl who always seemed calm enough to float rather than walk. She wasn't exactly shy, she just didn't wear her personality on the outside the way some people did. She didn't strut or posture or insert herself into conversations like many teens eager to define themselves. Instead, she observed with a composed attentiveness that made her seem older, more grounded, almost serene. To Derek, though, she looked like a perfect target. Alone, small, non-confrontational, and, most importantly, unfamiliar with the expectations and dynamics of Redland's unspoken social order. The collision itself happened in a blink. Derek rounded the corner too fast, too carelessly, brushing right into Myra's shoulder hard enough to jolt her a full step sideways. A normal person might have muttered, "Sorry," or at least shot an embarrassed glance before continuing on, but Derek was not a normal person, not when irritation was already buzzing through him. Instead, he snapped, "Watch where you're going," as though the accident had been her deliberate sabotage of his morning. Mira blinked once, steadying her balance with the effortless control of someone accustomed to physical awareness. "You ran into me," she said, not defensively, not provocatively, but simply stating a fact with a level tone that somehow frustrated Derek more than outright defiance would have. Her calmness felt to him like disrespect, like she wasn't taking him seriously, like she wasn't afraid, and Derek thrived on fear. So he stepped closer, squaring up, making sure his shadow fell across her. Students nearby slowed, noticing the shift, the way the air around Derek seemed to thicken as he puffed up with that familiar urge to dominate. Mira didn't back away, she didn't raise her voice or avert her gaze. She merely stood there, hands relaxed at her sides, her backpack strap slipping slightly off one shoulder as though this were any other conversation and not the beginning of something that would soon be whispered about for weeks. Derek mistook her composure for weakness, an error rooted not in malice but in ignorance. "Don't get smart with me," he said, and before anyone realized what he intended, Derek reached out, his hand closing around Myra's throat, not squeezing hard, just enough to assert dominance, to jolt fear into her. Gasps erupted around them, phones tilted upward. A teacher at the end of the hall had not yet noticed. For a second, everything hung suspended, the crowd, the hallway noise, the morning rush. Myra's eyes widened slightly, not in panic, but in disappointment, as though this entire situation were an inconvenience she wished she didn't have to address. Her breath came steady, her posture remained rooted, and deep behind her focused gaze flickered a truth no one, least of all Derek, had any inkling of. Mira Lane was a black belt in Krav Maga, trained by an instructor who believed in preparing students for real-world self-defense scenarios, not tournament theatrics. She had spent years drilling reflexive movements until they became woven into her muscle memory like instinct, practicing not with the intention to harm, but to prevent harm, her own and others. She had promised her parents she would never use her training unless absolutely necessary, and she had kept that promise without exception. But a hand at her throat, an aggressor closing in with intent to intimidate, was precisely the kind of situation her instructors had taught her to anticipate calmly, decisively, and without hesitation. She knew precisely how much force a confrontation like this required, and how much was too much. She didn't want to embarrass him. She didn't want to fight. She just wanted his hand gone. What happened next unfolded with such disciplined precision and economy of motion that most of the spectators couldn't fully process it until it was already over. Mira didn't jerk back or flail or panic the way Derek expected. Instead, her hands came up smoothly, almost gently, as though she were adjusting a collar rather than responding to an assault. Her left hand grasped his wrist to prevent him from tightening his grip, while her right hand rotated sharply upward, targeting the exposed leverage point between Derek's thumb and forefinger, a simple move, fast and controlled, that broke the hold without causing actual injury. His fingers unlatched involuntarily. The moment his hand released, Mira stepped aside, pivoting off the line of his body with a fluidity that made the motion seem effortless, placing herself out of striking distance without escalating the encounter. Students around them exhaled as though in unison, startled by the sudden reversal. Derek stumbled a half-step, more shocked than hurt, blinking rapidly as though trying to understand how the smaller girl he'd expected to intimidate had just dismantled his posture of dominance with the same ease someone might use to close a locker door. Mira didn't advance on him. She didn't raise her voice. She simply held up one hand, not as a threat, but as a boundary. "Stop," she said, calm but firm, projecting a kind of quiet authority that made even bystanders straighten unconsciously. Her voice carried the weight of someone who didn't want to fight, but absolutely would if pressed. And that tone, more than anything, made Derek hesitate. For a heartbeat, he stood frozen, stuck between the instinct to reclaim his pride and the instinct to back away from something he now understood, dimly, was far beyond his control. Mira's stance, though subtle, conveyed a readiness he couldn't mistake, feet rooted yet mobile, posture relaxed yet alert, gaze steady but not hostile. It was the posture of someone trained to end a conflict quickly and decisively, someone who understood the responsibility that came with skill. The small circle of students who had gathered around them watched in a hush that felt almost ceremonial, their earlier excitement replaced with a dawning respect they hadn't yet found words for. For the first time, Derek realized the gravity of the mistake he had made, and something inside him, a mix of embarrassment, fear, and confusion, tightened uncomfortably. He swallowed, glancing around at the witnesses, his usual bravado slipping. But Mira wasn't interested in humiliating him, she wasn't even looking at the spectators. Her attention remained on maintaining de-escalation, her breathing steady, her hands loose at her sides. She wanted him to walk away. She wanted everyone to walk away. The only thing she needed was for Derek to choose that path himself. A teacher's voice finally rang out, sharp and alarmed. "What's going on here, Mr.?" Hanover pushed through the crowd, and in that instant, Derek made a decision, not noble, not admirable, but the only one he could make without collapsing under the full weight of shame. He stepped back, muttered, "Nothing," and turned away, pretending the entire encounter hadn't rattled him to his core. Mira didn't correct him. She didn't call attention to what he had done. She simply nodded to the teacher, murmured something about a misunderstanding, and shouldered her backpack. As the students parted to let her pass, their expressions were a blend of awe, curiosity, and newfound appreciation for the quiet girl who had just demonstrated that strength didn't always roar, it sometimes whispered. Mira walked on, her steps unhurried, her composure unbroken, her mind already shifting away from the incident. She wasn't fueled by victory or vindication, she felt neither pride nor triumph. It was simply something she had been trained to do, protect herself, restore peace, and move forward. Later, the hallway would buzz with exaggerated retellings, stories of miraculous flips, bone-crushing strength, superhuman reflexes, but none of them would capture the real truth, that the most formidable thing about Mira Lane wasn't her skill, but her restraint.